The rain-slicked streets of Manhattan gleamed under the neon haze of Times Square. But inside Le Cirque, one of the city's most cherished French bistros, tucked away on East 58th Street, the world felt a universe apart. Crystal chandeliers dripped golden light onto crisp white linens and polished silverware, while the soft murmur of jazz from a live pianist wove through the air like a lover's whisper. It was the kind of place where deals were sealed over foie gras and dreams lingered in the steam rising from porcelain cups of espresso. For women like Eleanor Carter, elegant, resilient souls who'd weathered the Great Recession, raised families through the digital revolution, and now, in their golden years, savored the quiet victories of a life well lived. This restaurant evoked memories of first dances and anniversaries long past. It was a sanctuary for the heart where time slowed just enough to remind you that love in all its fragile glory was worth one more chance. James Carter, 35, and as polished as the cufflinks glinting on his starched shirt, sat alone at a corner banquette, his broad shoulders casting a subtle shadow over the table. A white man with the chiseled features of old Hollywood, sharp jawline, piercing blue eyes, framed by wire-rimmed glasses, he embodied the Silicon Valley archetype, the self-made billionaire CEO of Nexus Innovations, a tech empire that had revolutionized quantum computing from its Palo Alto headquarters. His navy Brioni suit hugged his athletic frame, a testament to dawn runs along the Hudson and late-night strategy sessions fueled by black coffee and ambition. But tonight, ambition felt like a distant echo. James scrolled through his iPhone, thumb flicking past urgent emails from venture capitalists and board members, his expression a mask of cool detachment. He wasn't here for romance. He was here for his mother. Eleanor had always been his North Star, the widowed matriarch who'd buried her dreams of a literary career to raise him single-handedly in a modest Brooklyn brownstone, scraping by on a teacher's salary, while whispering stories of far-off places to make the evenings magical. Now at 68, she was fighting a stubborn battle with congestive heart failure, her once vibrant laugh reduced to breathy whispers during their weekly FaceTime calls from her assisted living apartment in Greenwich Village. Just one last blind date, Jamie, she'd pleaded last month, her voice crackling over the line like autumn leaves underfoot. I've met someone special through my volunteer work at the community clinic. She's kind, grounded, the kind of woman who reminds me of the girl I used to be. Do it for me, darling. One evening, and I'll never ask again. James had relented as he always did for her, not out of guilt, but out of that deep, unspoken love that binds sons to mothers like an invisible tether. He'd flown in from California that afternoon, enduring the red-eye, just to keep his promise. But he'd set his boundaries firm. 20 minutes. Polite conversation, a glass of Sancerre, and then a graceful exit back to his penthouse overlooking Central Park. No more illusions about love. Not after the string of polished executives and socialites who'd seen him as a ticket to the Forbes list, rather than a man with scars from a childhood shadowed by loss, his father's sudden heart attack when James was 12, the same cruel thief now circling his mother. Love, he'd convinced himself, was a luxury for poets and fools. He was neither. The pianist shifted into a haunting rendition of La Vie en Rose, and James glanced at his Rolex Submariner, 7:12 p.m. 8 minutes in. He signaled the waiter for the check, already composing his text to Eleanor. It was lovely, Mom. She's wonderful. But you know me, work calls. That's when the heavy oak door swung open, with a whisper, admitting a gust of cool October air, laced with the scent of wet pavement and distant pretzels from a street vendor. She stepped in like she'd wandered in from a parallel world, shaking droplets from a simple black trench coat that had seen better days. Luna Johnson, 32, was a vision of unapologetic authenticity, a black woman with rich mahogany skin that glowed under the ambient lights, her natural curls cascading in loose coils just past her shoulders, framing a face that held the quiet strength of ancestral oaks. She wore a knee-length red wrap dress, vintage perhaps from a thrift shop in Harlem, its fabric soft and unpretentious, hugging her curves without apology. No heavy makeup, no statement jewelry, just a pair of silver hoop earrings that caught the light like fireflies, and a canvas tote slung over one shoulder, bulging with what looked like dog-eared children's books and a half-eaten granola bar. Her brown eyes, deep and luminous, scanned the room with a mix of trepidation and resolve, landing on James like a compass finding true north. He stood instinctively, his 6'2" frame unfolding with the precision of a man used to commanding boardrooms. "Ms. Johnson," he said, extending a hand, his voice smooth but edged with the wariness of someone who'd mastered the art of small talk as a shield. "Luna, please." She replied, her tone warm as fresh cornbread with the faint lilt of a southern upbringing. Atlanta roots, he'd guess later. She slipped her hand into his firm yet gentle, her palm calloused from chalkboards and playground tethers rather than manicures and mergers. As she settled into the chair, he pulled out the faint scent of vanilla, and rain clung to her, cutting through the restaurant's opulent notes of truffle and oak. The waiter materialized with menus, but Luna waved him off lightly. "Water's fine for now, thank you." James sat, resetting his internal timer. 10 minutes left. He studied her across the flickering votive candle, searching for the script, the flirtatious laugh, the probing questions about his net worth, the subtle lean-in that screamed calculation. But Luna simply unfolded her napkin, placed it on her lap, and met his gaze with an openness that felt disarming, like sunlight piercing fog. "I know who you are, James Carter," she began, her voice steady, laced with a quiet humor that crinkled the corners of her eyes. "The quantum whiz kid who's got half of Wall Street betting on your next IPO. My students at PS 197 up in Harlem, they're obsessed with tech. One of them even printed out your TED Talk transcript and taped it to his locker. Mr. Carter's gonna save the world with computers," he says. James blinked, caught off guard. Most women led with flattery or feigned ignorance. This felt real. "Kids have a way of cutting through the noise," he replied, a faint smile tugging at his lips despite himself. "And you, Mom says you're a teacher. 3rd grade. She nodded, her curls bouncing slightly. 18 little whirlwinds every day. We debate everything from why the sky's blue to whether pineapple belongs on pizza. Keeps me young, or at least pretends to." Her laugh was low and genuine, like the rumble of distant thunder, and for a moment, James felt the knot in his chest loosen. 7 minutes. The conversation flowed easier than he'd anticipated about the chaos of recess duties, the joy of a child's first aha moment over fractions, the exhaustion of lesson plans scribbled on napkins during commutes on the A train. Luna spoke with the passion of someone who'd chosen her path, not for acclaim, but for the quiet alchemy of turning confusion into confidence. James found himself sharing snippets of his own world, the thrill of debugging code at 3 a.m., the loneliness of jet-lag-fueled hotel rooms in Tokyo. It was surface level, he told himself, just killing time. Then as the waiter cleared their untouched appetizers, James's escargot congealing like unspoken regrets, Luna leaned forward slightly, her expression shifting to something deeper, more shadowed. The pianist faded into a hush, and the rain pattered against the floor-to-ceiling windows like impatient fingers. "James," she said softly, her voice dropping to a confessional timbre that made the space between them feel sacred. "I know why your mother set this up. She's told me all about you, how you light up talking about algorithms, but go quiet when it comes to matters of the heart. And that's okay. But there's something I need to tell you right here before we go any further." He froze fork midway to his mouth. This was the pivot, the ask, the moment when the mask slipped and the agenda emerged. His mind raced. Was she after funding for her school? A connection to his network? He braced the old walls rising like firewalls. But Luna's eyes held no guile, only a flicker of vulnerability that mirrored the fragility he'd seen in Eleanor's hospital photos. "I know you're doing this for her," she continued, "because she's running out of tomorrows. And God, that breaks my heart. I see it every day in my kids' eyes, the fear of losing what little they have. But James, your mother didn't just introduce us tonight. She saved my life 5 years ago. That night in the clinic when my world was crumbling, divorce papers from a man who promised forever, but delivered lies, a foster placement falling through, and me staring down the barrel of giving up. She sat with me, till dawn, holding my hand, telling me I was stronger than I knew. She saw me when I couldn't see myself." James's breath caught the words landing like a glitch in his perfectly coded reality. Saved her life. Eleanor had never mentioned. His mind reeled back to that year, the one where he'd been too buried in acquisitions to visit, more than quarterly sending checks instead of presents. Guilt twisted like a knife, sharp and unexpected. What Mom never said. "Exactly," Luna whispered, reaching across the table to cover his hand with hers, her touch warm, steadying. "Because that's who she is, the quiet hero weaving miracles in the margins. And tonight, she asked me to return the favor, not to fix you, James, but to remind you that love isn't a transaction. It's showing up when the rain won't stop, and the heart's too heavy to beat alone." The candle flame danced between them, casting shadows that softened the lines of exhaustion on James's face. 12 minutes over. But he didn't move. Couldn't. In that suspended breath as the jazz swelled into a tender crescendo, he saw it not just Luna's sincerity, but a glimpse of the boy he'd buried under boardroom battles, the son who'd trade empires for one more story from his mother's lips. What secret had Eleanor entrusted to this woman, this stranger who felt like a memory waiting to unfold? And why, in the span of a heartbeat, did the walls he'd built feel like they might finally mercifully crack? As the evening deepened, dear friends, those of us who've loved through the wars of time, who've held our children's hands through storms and watched them fly, let this be a gentle nudge to your own hearts. In a world that rushes us toward endings, pause tonight. Reach for that call to a far-flung son, that unfinished letter to a cherished friend. Love, after all, isn't in the grand gestures we chase. It's in the small, brave yes that says, "I'm here." And who knows? Your next one last time might just rewrite the stars. The words hung in the air between them, like the last notes of a melody fading into silence. Luna's hand still resting lightly on James's, her touch a quiet anchor in the storm of revelations. He didn't pull away. For the first time that evening, or perhaps in years, James felt the weight of his mother's unspoken kindnesses settle, not as a burden, but as a bridge. Eleanor's clinic shifts her late-night stories of patients who'd become family. He'd always known she gave pieces of herself away. But to hear it woven into this woman's story, this stranger's survival, it stirred something dormant in him, a flicker of warmth against the perpetual chill of his boardroom calculations. "Luna," he said finally, his voice low, threaded with the gravel of genuine surprise. I had no idea." Mom's always been the type to downplay her light. She raised me on tales of everyday heroes, nurses who worked double shifts, neighbors who shared their last loaf during the Ozo 8 crash. But she never told me about you. He paused, his blue eyes searching hers, not with the predatory scrutiny he reserved for pitch decks, but with a vulnerability that felt foreign, like slipping into an old sweater that no longer fit quite right. "What happened that night, if you don't mind me asking?" She withdrew her hand slowly, not in retreat, but to cradle her water glass, her fingers tracing the condensation, as if mapping the paths of forgotten rivers. The pianist had eased into Autumn Leaves, the melody a soft lament for seasons slipping away, and in that hush, Luna began to unravel the thread. It was a Tuesday much like this one, rainy, relentless. I'd just turned 27, fresh out of a marriage that crumbled faster than I could patch it. My ex, well, let's just say he chased dreams in boardrooms while I chased stability in classrooms. When it ended, I was left holding the pieces, a tiny apartment in Washington Heights, student loans that whispered threats in the dark, and a volunteer gig at the clinic that kept me sane. Your mom was coordinating the evening shift, matching volunteers with patients who needed more than medicine. Someone to listen. Really listen. James leaned in, elbows on the table. The forgotten escargot pushed aside like yesterday's headlines. He could picture it, Eleanor's silver-streaked hair tied back in a practical bun, her cardigan sleeves rolled up, sleeves stained with coffee rings from endless mugs shared in crisis. She saw me unraveling. Luna continued, her voice steady but laced with the echo of old aches. Applying for foster certification because I couldn't shake the faces of those kids I'd taught, who'd bounced from home to home. But the paperwork hit a wall, background checks dragging on, funding cuts biting deep. That night, a little girl named Tia showed up at the ER, bruises blooming like cruel flowers on her arms. Her mama was in withdrawal, and social services was overwhelmed. I volunteered to sit with her, but by midnight, I was the one breaking, doubting if I had the strength to be what she needed when I could barely hold myself together. A shadow crossed Luna's face, not of defeat, but of the fierce tenderness that comes from walking through fire and emerging with calluses that protect rather than harden. Eleanor found me in the break room, head in my hands, tears mixing with the instant coffee dregs. She didn't offer platitudes or pep talks. She pulled up a chair, poured me a fresh cup decaf because she knew my nerves were shot, and said, "Child strength isn't about never falling. It's about who catches you when you do." We talked till the sky lightened about my Atlanta grandmama, who'd baked pecan pies through the civil rights marches, about how love isn't a ledger, but a legacy. By dawn, she'd connected me with a pro bono lawyer. From her network helped me revise my foster application. And Tia. She went home with me that week, temporary at first. Now she's Zoe, my forever girl, 9 years old, and bossing the playground like she owns it. James's throat tightened, the story landing not as anecdote, but as indictment of his own life, spent tallying acquisitions, while Eleanor tallied graces. He thought of the holidays he'd skipped for investor calls, the birthday cards sent with extravagant gifts, but scant presents. "She's always been like that," he murmured, more to himself than to Luna. Even after Dad, after the heart attack, she turned grief into gardens, literal ones in community plots, where she'd teach kids to plant seeds and watch them grow. I was 15, lost in video games and resentment, but she'd drag me out there saying, "Sun roots run deep when you give them room to breathe." I didn't get it then. Hell, I'm not sure I do now. Luna's smile returned, soft, as the first light after a nor'easter, crinkling the fine lines at her eyes that spoke of laughter earned through trials. That's the beauty of it, James. We don't have to get it all at once. Those kids in my third-grade class at PS 197, they're my daily reminder. Harlem's got its rhythms brownstones echoing with salsa-beat street vendors, hawking tamales under the 125th Street lights. But inside those classroom walls, it's a universe. 22 souls each with stories heavier than their backpacks. We don't dive into algorithms or stock tickers. We wrestle with the real code of life, like how to share a Chromebook during remote learning glitches, or why recycling matters when the East River's choked with plastic ghosts. She paused as the waiter refilled their waters, his movements a discreet ballet, then leaned forward with the spark of someone igniting a lesson. Take TikTok debates. They're my secret weapon for keeping attention spans alive. Last week we had a full-blown summit on superheroes versus climate activists. Jamal, my resident Spider-Man stan, argued Tony Stark's arc reactor could power solar farms, but little Aisha, with her braids tied in rainbow ribbons, shut it down. Nah, Mr. Carter. Wait, that's you, right? Your fancy tech won't fix floods if we don't teach folks to care first. I had to stifle a laugh because, well, she nailed it. These kids, James, they're not just scrolling. They're scripting their futures in 15-second bursts. From Black Panther's Wakanda vibes to Greta Thunberg's Fridays for Future, they blend it all: imagination and urgency, heart and hustle. James chuckled, the sound surprising him, low and unpracticed, like dust shaken from an attic trunk. In Silicon Valley, conversations were chess matches probing for leverage, angling for alliances. His dates, rare as they were, danced around his Tesla's autopilot features, or the nexus of his latest patent eyes, glazing with dollar signs. But Luna. She sidestepped it all, her words, a meandering river that pulled him under without warning. No questions about his 9-figure valuation, no sly inquiries into private jets or Napa retreats. Instead, she painted Harlem's pulse with strokes of crayon-bright chaos. Recess tug-of-wars over the last swing morning circles where confessions spilled like spilled milk. Miss Luna, my brother's joining the army and I'm scared he'll forget us. And then there's Marcus, she said, her voice dipping into that confessional timbre again, eyes distant, as if watching a reel of memory. 8 years old with a gap-toothed grin that could melt glaciers. Comes to school every day with his lunch packed in a crumpled brown bag, peanut butter on Wonder Bread apple slices turning brown by noon. But he never eats more than half. Saves the rest for his baby sister Lila back home with their grandma. Says, she's little Miss Luna, needs the energy more than me. First time I noticed, I thought it was a game. Slipped an extra sandwich into his cubby, all casual-like. He found it, stared at me with those big brown eyes, and whispered, "You can't do that every day. What if she thinks I'm not strong enough to share?" The candle's flame wavered, casting golden flecks across Luna's cheekbones, and James felt it then, a sensation alien to his lexicon of metrics and milestones. Not admiration exactly. That implied distance, a pedestal. This was curiosity, raw and insistent, like the pull of a tide he'd long ignored. Marcus's story echoed his own boyhood echoes, scavenging Eleanor's fridge for midnight snacks, after Dad's chair sat empty, learning too young that provision was both gift and grief. What world was this Luna inhabited, where a child's halved sandwich carried more weight than a venture round a realm of scraped knees and unspoken sacrifices, far from the sterile glow of his corner office, yet pulsing with a vitality that made his algorithms feel like echoes in an empty hall? He set down his fork, the escargot long cold, and met her gaze squarely. That That's not the kind of sharing I know. In my line, it's about scaling equity shares' IP licenses. But what Marcus does, that's calculus of the soul. The words tumbled out unbidden, laced with a humility he'd forgotten he possessed. Luna nodded, not with pity, but with the quiet recognition of kin to souls who'd navigated betrayals and built bridges from the rubble. As the jazz curled toward its close, the rain easing to a drizzle that blurred the city lights into impressionist smears, James realized his timer had expired, not in escape, but in arrival. 20 minutes stretched into an uncharted hour, the conversation a gentle excavation unearthing layers he'd buried deep. Luna's world wasn't a detour. It was a doorway cracked open just enough to let in the scent of possibility, of laughter lines etched by joy, of hands extended not for gain, but for grace. And in that revelation, as the check arrived unnoticed on the table's edge, James wondered if this blind date born of a mother's fading plea might just be the map to a homecoming he'd never known he craved. The check arrived like an uninvited guest, slipped onto the table's edge by the waiter, with the discreet flourish of someone who'd seen 1,000 evenings unfold in similar hush. James reached for it automatically, his fingers brushing the leather folder. But Luna placed a gentle hand atop his, shaking her head with that easy smile that seemed to disarm without effort. "Let me split it," she said, her voice carrying the no-nonsense warmth of a woman who'd long ago learned the dignity in balance. "Your mom's kindness got us here. The least I can do is even the scales." He waved it off, insisting on the full tab, a reflex born of boardroom etiquette and the quiet privilege of a life where gestures like this were currency, not concession. As the waiter vanished into the din of clinking glasses and murmured proposals, their plates sat largely untouched. James's seared scallops cooling in a pool of beurre blanc, Luna's herb-crusted salmon flaking apart under the weight of its own elegance. The conversation had meandered like the East River at dusk, tides of shared silences broken by ripples of revelation, and neither had found the rhythm to eat. Time, it seemed, had become the real feast. "Everything all right?" the waiter inquired upon his return, eyeing the remnants with polite concern. Luna glanced at her plate, then out the rain-streaked window, where the city lights bled into watercolor halos, and nodded decisively. "Actually, could I get a to-go bag for this? The salmon's too good to waste." Her tone was matter-of-fact, laced with the practicality of a teacher who'd mastered the art of salvaging field trip lunches from the brink of disaster. James arched an eyebrow, a flicker of amusement crossing his features. To-go bags in Le Cirque. It felt like smuggling contraband into Versailles, charming in its audacity but utterly out of place. He assumed it was thrift, the kind honed in Harlem's bustling markets, where every dollar stretched like taffy to cover rent and report cards. Admirable, sure, but unremarkable in the grand ledger of his world, where excess was the norm and leftovers meant catered team-building retreats for his Palo Alto staff. The bag arrived swiftly wrapped in brown craft paper, with the restaurant's embossed crest, a touch of luxury even in departure. Luna thanked the waiter with a genuine, "Bless you," slipping a folded bill into his palm that James suspected was more than her share of the meal. She stood then smoothing her red dress with unhurried grace and excused herself toward the coat check. "Just a quick errand," she murmured over her shoulder, her curls catching the chandelier's glow like threads of burnished copper. James watched her go, the folder still warm in his hand, his mind drifting to the text he'd crafted for Eleanor. "Met Luna. She's as real as you said. Thanks, Mom. Heading back soon." 20 minutes had ballooned into 90, and yet the pull to linger tugged at him, unfamiliar as a loose thread in his impeccably tailored life. Through the window, the drizzle had thickened into a steady patter, turning the sidewalk into a mosaic of umbrellas and hurried strides. Pedestrians huddled under the green awning of the Starbucks across the street, its golden arches a beacon in the gloaming. And there, half obscured by the steam-fogged glass and the overhang of a construction scaffold, sat a figure James hadn't noticed before. An older man, perhaps in his late 50s, bundled in a threadbare parka that had long surrendered to the elements. His knees drawn to his chest, he stared at the ground, a cardboard sign, propped beside him. "Anything helps, God bless," its edges curling from the damp. The sight registered dimly in James's periphery, a urban tableau as commonplace as yellow cabs in gridlock. In his Silicon Valley bubble, such encounters were mediated by apps, Venmo donations, to causes blockchain-backed charities, where impact was quantified in dashboards and donor reports. Direct messy that was for volunteers and visionaries, not CEOs charting the next unicorn. But Luna didn't hesitate. Bag in hand, she pushed through the restaurant's revolving door, the bell tinkling like a distant memory, and stepped into the downpour without so much as a glance for cover. James's gaze followed, compelled by the simple audacity of it, her trench coat flapping open, rain beating on her exposed arms as she darted across the avenue, dodging a splash from a passing Uber. She approached the man, not with the performative sweep of a benefactor, but with the quiet crouch of a neighbor, lowering herself to his level on the slick pavement. Words passed between them, too muffled by the traffic's hum to discern, but her posture spoke volumes, shoulders relaxed, head tilted in that attentive way teachers reserve for the shyest pupil. She extended the bag, and he took it with hands that trembled, not from cold alone, but from the rare grace of being seen. A nod, a brief clasp of shoulders, nothing theatrical, no camera-ready flourish. Then Luna rose, wiped a streak of rain from her cheek, and recrossed the street. Her steps unhurried, as if the world hadn't just tilted on its axis. She slipped back into the banquette, shaking off the wet like a retriever after a swim, her cheeks flushed with the chill. The napkin refolded itself in her lap, and she picked up her water glass, as if resuming a sonnet mid-stanza. No fanfare, no explanation, just the subtle steam rising from her coat carrying the faint brine of the salmon and the sharper tang of October air. James stared, the leather folder forgotten in his grip, a low hum building in his chest that had nothing to do with the jazz pianist's coda. In his world of leveraged buyouts and liquidity events, problems were puzzles. Fund a shelter sign, a check to the mayor's office. Watch the metrics climb. Impact without implication, solutions severed from souls. But this was incarnation, flesh and rain, and a shared meal bridging chasms no algorithm could map. Why'd you do that? The question escaped him before he could temper it, his voice rougher than intended, laced with the raw edge of a man glimpsed without his armor. It wasn't accusation, but awe, the kind that cracks foundations like frost in stone. Luna paused, glass midway to her lips, and met his eyes with that luminous steadiness unblinking in the face of his scrutiny. She set the water down, her fingers lingering on the stem, and shrugged a small lift of shoulders that carried the weight of lifetimes. "Because I saw him," she said simply, as if the answer were etched in the raindrops tracing the pain. "And because I could help. It's not about the food, James. It's about the moment, the one where you remind someone they're not invisible." Back in Atlanta, my grandmama used to say, "Child, the world's a mirror. What you give comes back tenfold, not in dollars, but in the light you leave behind." That man out there, he's got stories etched deeper than any spreadsheet. Maybe a vet from Nam like my uncle carrying ghosts heavier than his pack. Or a dad who lost his footing in the US-08 crash, same as so many we knew. I don't fix it all, but I can share a plate. And who knows, Tonight that might be the spark that warms him through till morning. Her words settled over him, like a quilt stitched from memory's scraps. Eleanor's kitchen table after Dad's funeral, where neighbors dropped off casseroles, not for show, but for solace. The community garden plots where she'd coaxed tomatoes from concrete, teaching him that growth demanded dirt, under nails, not just sunlight. James had built his empire on clean lines and closed deals, outsourcing empathy to foundations bearing his name. Nexus Innovations donated millions to edtech startups, sure, but it was arm's-length benevolence press releases and photo ops, never the visceral chill of rain on skin or the tremor of grateful hands. A fissure opened, then, small but insistent, in the fortress he'd erected around his heart walls of wire-rimmed glasses, and whispered negotiations mortared with the fear that vulnerability was just another vulnerability to exploit. He exhaled slowly, the sound lost in the restaurant's symphony, and for the first time that night, truly looked at Luna, not as Eleanor's proxy or a curiosity from Harlem's heart, but as a woman whose compass pointed true north, unswayed by the magnetic pull of power or prestige. I've never thought of it that way. He admitted, the confession tasting of rust, like blood from a bitten tongue. In my line, help comes in tranches, venture capital for the next big thing. But seeing you out there, it's like you handed him more than dinner. You handed him dignity. Luna's smile deepened lines, fanning at her eyes like sunbursts on a well-loved quilt, and she reached across the table once more, her palm open in invitation rather than demand. Dignity's the real currency, James, and it's free if you're willing to spend it. Their fingers met a circuit, completing in the space between, and as the rain softened to a mist beyond the glass, James felt the fracture widen, not breaking him, but breathing life into the stone. This blind date, once a checkbox for a mother's whim, was reshaping into something seismic, a quiet revolution sparked by a to-go bag and a stranger's unseen scars. And in that fragile dawn of connection, he wondered if the man emerging from the rubble might just be worth meeting. The morning after the rain-soaked evening at Le Cirque dawned crisp and golden, the kind of October light that painted Harlem's brownstones in hues of amber and rust, as if the city itself were tipping its hat to the turning leaves. James Carter navigated the labyrinth of one-way streets in his rented Escalade, the GPS chiming directions to a derelict lot on 125th Street, a prime parcel his team at Nexus Innovations had earmarked for a new community tech hub. It was meant to be a feather in his cap's solar-powered charging stations for e-bikes' free Wi-Fi kiosks, to bridge the digital divide, all wrapped in the glossy branding of corporate benevolence. He'd arrived from his Central Park penthouse before the traffic thickened, clipboard in hand, hard hat tucked under his arm, like a talisman against the grit of urban renewal. This was his domain, blueprints and budgets, where transformation came swift and surgical, measured in square footage and ROI projections. But as he pulled up to the chain-link fence bordering the site, engine humming to a stop, the hum of his world faltered. Over the fence, beyond the weeds, choking the asphalt and the faded graffiti tags proclaiming Harlem Lives, rose a chorus of unbridled laughter, high-pitched and infectious, the sort that bubbled up from the belly like fizzy root beer on a summer porch. It wasn't the polished peel of venture capitalists sealing deals over Zoom. This was raw, unfiltered joy, the kind that tugged at heartstrings long dormant. James killed the ignition, stepping out into the chill, his Italian leather loafers crunching on gravel. He adjusted his Ray-Bans against the sun, intending a quick perimeter scan, but the sound pulled him closer, like a siren's call from a childhood storybook his mother used to read by flashlight during blackouts. Peering through the diamond-patterned wire, he spotted the source, a cracked concrete playground adjacent to Public School 197, alive with a whirlwind of small bodies in mismatched sneakers and hoodies, emblazoned with superheroes and school pride. Jump ropes slapped rhythmically against the pavement, Mississippi 5010, while a game of tag devolved into gleeful pylons, shrieks echoing off the brick walls like echoes of freedom. And at the center of it all, orchestrating the chaos with the effortless command of a maestro, was Luna. She wore faded jeans tucked into scuffed ankle boots, a Harlem Globetrotters sweatshirt zipped halfway over a thermal tee, her curls tamed into a high puff that bobbed as she spun. No makeup, no pretense, just the faint sheen of exertion on her forehead, and a whistle looped around her neck like a badge of honor. She was mid-chase, fainting left to rescue a giggling girl from the tagger's grasp, her laughter weaving through the fray like thread in a quilt. James's breath caught an involuntary hitch that had nothing to do with the crisp air. There she was, the woman who'd upended his evening with a to-go bag and a theology of touch now in her element, a force of nature amid the pint-sized tempests. He should have turned away. His assistant was en route with the surveyors, and lingering here, risked blurring the lines between professional reconnaissance and personal reverie. But his feet traitors to his timetable carried him to the gate where a sign proclaimed, "Recess, sacred time. Volunteers welcome." Before he could second guess, he'd slipped the latch and stepped inside the playground's energy, enveloping him like a warm front rolling in off the Atlantic. The shift was immediate, visceral, from the sterile hum of his Escalade to the symphony of scraped knees and whispered secrets. A basketball thudded against the chain-link backboard, rebounding into his path. He fielded it on instinct, dribbling once-twice before passing it back to a wiry boy with cornrows and a gap-toothed grin. "Nice handles, mister," the kid yelled, vanishing into the scrum. James straightened his tie, pointless armor in this arena, and scanned for an exit strategy. But Luna's voice cut through, first sharp with surprise and delight. "James, what in the world?" She straightened from her crouch, brushing playground dust from her palms, her brown eyes widening in that mix of wariness and welcome he'd glimpsed over candlelight the night before. The whistle fell silent against her chest, and for a heartbeat the playground seemed to pause the children's orbit, slowing as if sensing a gravitational pull. Before he could muster a reply, something suave about urban development or serendipity. A small voice piped up from the sidelines, clear as a bell in a quiet chapel. "Hey, that's the handsome guy from Miss Luna's date last night, the one with the fancy car on Grandma Eleanor's Insta." All heads swiveled, a sea of curious faces turning toward him, round cheeks flushed with exertion, eyes bright with the unfiltered scrutiny only children wield. At the epicenter stood Zoe, Luna's foster daughter, perched on a low bench, with her walker propped beside her like a loyal steed. 9 years old, with skin the warm hue of polished walnut, and braids threaded with colorful beads that clacked softly as she tilted her head, gripped the edge of her seat. Her legs slender and braced from a congenital condition that made every step a small triumph, dangling just above the ground. She'd scrolled through Eleanor's Instagram the evening prior, the older woman's posts, a digital scrapbook of clinic smiles and garden harvests, and there he was, James captured mid-laugh in a rare candid shot from a charity gala, tagged with a heart emoji and the caption, "Proud of my boy. Uncle Handsome for real." Zoe's declaration ignited the tinderbox. The playground erupted in a wave of giggles and chants. "Uncle Handsome, Uncle Handsome," spreading like wildfire through dry grass. A cluster of girls in pigtails swarmed him, first tugging at his wool trousers with demands for high fives. Boys circled like pint-sized private eyes, peppering him with questions. You got a Batmobile. Can you code a robot to do my homework? James, whose interactions with youth were limited to keynote speeches at EdTech conferences, carefully scripted soundbites about STEM pipelines, felt the ground tilt. These weren't data points. They were dynamos, each one a blur of energy and expectation, pulling him into their vortex with the inexorable force of a riptide. He knelt to Zoe's level, balancing on the balls of his feet, his Brioni slacks protesting the descent. Guilty as charged, he said, flashing a grin that felt more genuine than any he'd mustered in a merger meeting. Though I prefer Agent Awesome. What's your code name, kiddo? Zoe's eyes lit up, her small hand shooting out for a fist bump that landed with surprising solidity. Zoe the Zoomer. 'Cause I zoom past everybody in my wheels. She gestured to the lowrider trike adapted with hand pedals nearby, a contraption of neon tape and unyielding optimism. From there, it was a blur, a sticker assault from a kindergartner, wielding a roll of glittery unicorns slapped haphazardly across his lapel. An impromptu relay race where he anchored the grown-up team, lumbering after a fleet-footed third grader. Even a chalkboard tribunal where he was tried for crimes against fun, Mr. Do you ever play freeze tag in your office? And sentenced to a tickle fight that left him gasping on the blacktop. Through it all, laughter bubbled from him, unbidden, deep and rolling, the kind that started in the diaphragm and shook loose cobwebs from the soul. It had been years since he'd laughed like this, not the polite chuckle for a VC's joke, but the full-throated guffaw that crinkled his eyes and blurred his vision with unshed tears. The children didn't care about his Forbes ranking or the quantum patents pending. To them, he was a novelty, a tall tower of a man who could be toppled with a well-aimed dodgeball. And in their unvarnished acceptance, James glimpsed fragments of his younger self, the awkward teen tinkering with circuit boards in Eleanor's basement, dreaming of worlds beyond Brooklyn's stoops. From the periphery, Luna's gaze held steady, arms crossed over her sweatshirt as she leaned against the jungle gym. She wasn't hovering exactly her charges, knew the boundaries of recess, like the lines on their palms, but her eyes traced him with a quiet appraisal, the same attentive warmth she'd offered the homeless man under the Starbucks awning. There was no judgment there, no blueprint for what he should be, just observation, patient as the turning of seasons. In that look, James felt seen not as the billionaire architect of algorithms, but as a man mid-metamorphosis shedding scales in the sunlight. It stirred something profound, a longing to bridge the gap between their worlds, to trade his surveyor's clipboard for a jump rope, if only for an afternoon. As the recess bell tolled a tinny clang from the school's PA system, the children scattered like starlings to their lines, Zoe waving her walker like a scepter as she led the charge. "Come back soon, Agent Awesome. Miss Luna needs a sidekick." James rose, brushing chalk dust from his knees, stickers peeling at the edges like badges of a new initiation. Luna approached, then her stride unhurried, a faint smile playing at her lips. "Didn't peg you for the playground type," she said, voice low amid the settling din. "But you fit right in. Zoe's already planning your next mission." He met her eyes, the fissure from the night before widening into a chasm of possibility. "Maybe I am looking for one." He replied, the words carrying more weight than he'd intended. In the shadow of the fence, with the lot's weeds whispering of untapped potential, James realized this reunion wasn't chance, it was Chapter 2, beckoning him toward uncharted playgrounds of the heart. The recess bell's echo had barely faded into the Harlem afternoon when James slipped back through the chain-link gate, his surveyor's clipboard clutched like a shield against the whirlwind he'd just escaped. The playground's cacophony receded behind him, Zoe's triumphant "Zoomer out" still ringing in his ears as he slid into the Escalade, the leather seat cool against the warmth flushing his cheeks. Stickers clung stubbornly to his lapel. A sparkly unicorn, mid-gallop, a lopsided robot, labeled Future Boss. He peeled them off one by one, affixing them to the dashboard, like talismans, a quiet rebellion against the sterile precision of his world. Luna's parting glance lingered in the rear view, curious not cautious, propelling him toward the highway, with a velocity that had little to do with traffic. By evening, ensconced in his penthouse overlooking the Hudson's twilight shimmer, James poured a measure of single malt scotch, the amber liquid catching the city lights like fireflies in a jar. The day's notes lay scattered on the glass coffee table, sketches of the tech hub's footprint, cost projections for fiber optic trenches. But his mind wandered the cracked concrete of PS 197, replaying the chaos of freeze tag and the steady anchor of Luna's whistle. Who was she really? The teacher who'd traded candlelit confessions for chalk-dusted mornings. The woman whose to-go bag had upended his notions of benevolence. Curiosity that old Silicon Valley spark once funneled into market gaps, and user analytics now flickered toward her, insistent as a debug alert in the dead of night. He shouldn't. Boundaries were his bedrock due diligence for deals, not dates. Yet, as the scotch warmed his chest, he tapped out a message to his assistant, Elena, a sharp-eyed operative who'd vetted more startups than most VCs breakfasted with. Quiet background on Luna Johnson. P.S. 197 Harlem. Volunteer at Mom's Clinic. Nothing invasive. The reply came, swift on it. Report by morning. James set the phone down, staring at the skyline's electric veinwork, wondering if this was the fracture deepening or just the hum of infatuation, a glitch in his guarded code. Dawn broke with the precision of a boardroom alarm, coffee brewing in the automated hum of his kitchen, as Elena's encrypted file pinged his inbox. He settled into the Eames lounge tablet in hand, the document unfolding like a dossier on a rival acquisition. Luna. Elise. Johnson, 32, born in Atlanta to a nurse mother and a postal worker father. Both gone too soon, car accident when she was 14, leaving her to grandparents, who'd flavored collards with gospel hymns and hard-won wisdom. Valedictorian at Spelman College, bachelor's in economics, with a minor in education, her thesis a prescient dive into microfinance for underserved communities. Straight out of graduation, an offer from Goldman Sachs, full ride to their analyst program, the golden ticket to corner offices and seven-figure bonuses. Wall Street's siren song, where she'd have rubbed elbows with the titans who'd shaped the 2008 recovery and beyond. But she'd declined, politely, irrevocably. 2 weeks before orientation, a handwritten letter citing a calling to the classroom. Instead, she relocated to New York, landing at PS 197 on a Teach for America fellowship, her salary a fraction of the Sachs starting line, enough for ramen nights and rent-controlled walks-ups, but worlds away from the Hamptons weekends her peers chased. James paused, the tablet's glow reflecting in his eyes. He'd known ambition like that, the ladder climb that left calluses on the soul. Why forfeit it? The file scrolled on pixels, painting a portrait of quiet defiance. Then the engagement 3 years prior to Derek Hale, a venture capitalist whose name James recognized all too well, a silver-tongued shark in the fintech pond, notorious for a 2022 SEC probe into insider trading whispers, and a tabloid trail of infidelities that read like a bad sequel to The Wolf of Wall Street. They'd met at a gala for urban education reform, irony's cruel jest, engaged 6 months in, with a Tiffany solitaire that could fund a semester's supplies. The wedding was slated for the Plaza guest list, heavy with influencers and investors. But Luna called it off publicly, silent, privately shattered Hale's affair, with a junior associate exposed in a flurry of leaked texts, the kind that went viral on LinkedIn before HR could scrub them. No messy lawsuits, no vengeful posts, just a return address, changed a ring, donated to a women's shelter, and Luna, emerging leaner, bare heart, a scar turned shield. James set the tablet aside, the scotch from the night before souring in his memory. He'd navigated his own romantic minefields, the model who'd ghosted post-IPO windfall, the lawyer who'd mapped their future in prenups. But Luna's choice. It wasn't flight. It was fury transmuted into fortitude, a refusal to let betrayal dictate her blueprint. And then the footnote that anchored it all, Zoe. Legal guardianship papers filed 2 years back after the girl's biological parents, teen runaways overwhelmed by addiction's tide, surrendered her at a firehouse Dropbox, a bundled mystery, abandoned in the chill of a February dawn. Luna had been her first constant midnight feedings, in a studio apartment IEP meetings, fought tooth and nail for the braces and therapies that turned stumbles into strides. Zoe wasn't a cause. She was kin chosen in the marrow, her walker a testament to love's labor over luxury's lure. The realization settled over James, like the first frost of November, slow crystalline reshaping the landscape. Luna hadn't just spurned money. She'd rejected the ease it promised, the insulated bubble of brunches and buyouts. In its place, she'd carved a life of deliberate difficulty, lesson plans scrawled in the margins of foster forms, playground patrols that blurred into parenting. It echoed Eleanor's own script, the widow who'd traded novel drafts for night shifts planting seeds in Brooklyn soil when grief threatened to barren it. James had inherited the drive, but not the depth, his billions a bulwark against the voids he'd never filled. Now, staring at the file's closing lines, he felt the stirrings of something seismic, not pity, but profound regard. Respect, raw and unbidden, for a woman who'd audited her soul and chosen service over security. He closed the tablet, the city's morning bustle filtering through the floor-to-ceiling glass, ferry horns on the river, the distant wail of an ambulance. Action, then. Not grand gestures, but gestures nonetheless. By noon, a call to his foundation's director, an anonymous grant to PS 197, $250,000 earmarked for adaptive equipment, sensory classrooms, and a part-time aide to lighten Luna's load. No fanfare, no strings, just a wire transfer routed through a neutral nonprofit, the kind that dotted I's and crossed T's without fanfare. It felt right, a quiet counterpoint to the playground stickers still tucked in his briefcase. Help without the halo. 3 days later, the glass doors of Nexus Innovations' New York outpost, a sleek midtown tower of steel and smart glass, parted with a hydraulic sigh, admitting a figure that turned heads in the lobby's polished expanse. Luna, in a wool peacoat, dusted with the faint grit of subway tracks, her tote slung heavy with graded worksheets, stood at the security desk like a messenger from another realm. The receptionist, a fresh-faced intern, glanced up from her monitor, blinking at the contrast, Luna's unadorned poise against the lobby's parade of power suits and AirPods. "Ms. Johnson to see Mr. Carter," she said, voice level, extending a sealed envelope with the school's letterhead peeking from the flap. "Urgent." Word rippled upward, like a glitch in the matrix. By the time James emerged from the executive elevator, smoothing his tie against the phantom tug of playground chalk, Luna waited by the floor-to-ceiling windows overlooking Bryant Park's leaf-strewn paths. Rain threatened again, gray clouds scudding over the skyline, but her posture held the unyielding grace of an oak in wind. Arms crossed, chin lifted, eyes fixed on the middle distance where dog walkers traced lazy loops. She turned as he approached, the envelope clutched like evidence in a trial. "You sent this," she said, not a question, her tone threaded with the quiet steel of a teacher corralling a wayward lesson. The words landed flat, no accusation, but laced with the weight of unspoken expectation. James halted a pace away, hands slipping into his pockets to still their fidget, the lobby's ambient chatter fading to a hush around them. "It was meant to help," he replied, voice, even though his pulse betrayed him, a staccato rhythm, echoing the playground's jump rope chants. "For Zoe's class. The kids. No credit, no catch." He gestured vaguely toward the envelope, its crisp edges unyielding. "I saw how stretched you are. Thought it could ease." Luna held it out unwavering. "And it might. For books, for ramps, for the little things that keep the lights on." She paused, her brown eyes locking onto his, not with anger, but with the piercing clarity of someone who'd graded more than paper's souls in quiet moments. "But that's not how this works, James. Not for me. I turned down Wall Street because I learned early money's a tool, not a talisman. It builds walls if you let it, keeps you from the dirt, where real growth happens. Derek, my ex, he drowned in it, lied through it, left me sifting the wreckage. I won't let it buy my way into your world or pull you into mine on credit terms." The lobby's vastness amplified her words, echoing off marble and glass like ripples in a still pond. James felt the grant's intent curdle, not rejection but redirection, a mirror held to his methods. He'd funded symphonies, endowed chairs, all at arm's length, impact, sanitized in annual reports. But Luna's path. It demanded proximity, the sweat of recess runs, the ache of unanswered questions at parent-teacher nights. "If you want to help," she continued softer now, the envelope still extended like a gauntlet, "come and meet the kids, not as the check writer from the tower, but as the man who showed up once and made Zoe laugh till she snorted chocolate milk." Presence. James, that's the currency that lasts. Money can't buy. It can't teach a girl to trust when the world's handed her goodbyes. He took the envelope, fingers brushing hers in a spark of contact that lingered like static. And for a moment, the midtown rush blurred the suits and smartphones, dissolving into the park's autumnal hush. In her gaze, he saw not the file's footnotes, but the woman who'd chosen fractures over facades, fostering a family from the fragments. The realization bloomed tender, as a bruise Luna wasn't a puzzle to solve, but a path to walk her secrets, not barriers, but beacons. As she turned toward the door's coat swirling in the draft, James felt the pull, not to pursue, but to pause, to trade his tower's vantage for the ground-level grace of showing up. And in that quiet vow, unspoken, amid the lobby's indifferent flow, the secrets unveiled themselves, not as scandals, but as sacraments, invitations to a life less armored, more alive. The envelope from PS 197 lay unopened on James's desk like a sealed decree, its edges crisp against the polished mahogany, a silent rebuke amid the hum of Nexus Innovations' Midtown Nerve Center. 3 days had passed since Luna's visit. 3 days of boardroom marathons and midnight mergers, where he'd buried the sting of her words under layers of spreadsheets and strategy sessions. Presence, James. That's the currency that lasts. Her voice echoed in the quiet hours, a persistent glitch in his otherwise seamless code, challenging the architecture of a life built on transactions. He'd nodded then, pocketing the grant, like a deferred promise, but action eluded him. The playground's stickers had migrated to his wallet, tucked beside Eleanor's latest postcard, a watercolor of Greenwich Village stoops captioned in her looping script, "Fall's whispering change. Darling." Listen close. He meant to call to bridge the chasm with coffee or a casual drop-by at the school. Tomorrow. Always tomorrow. That tomorrow shattered at 5:47 a.m., the shrill trill of his phone slicing through the penthouse's pre-dawn hush, like a scalpel through silk. James bolted upright sheets tangling around his legs, the city skyline beyond the windows, a silhouette of indifferent spires. The caller ID glowed Mount Sinai Hospital. His heart, that well-oiled engine, stuttered. Mr. Carter, this is Dr. Patel from the cardiac unit. Your mother's had a significant episode congestive heart failure, acute decompensation. She's stable now, but we had to intubate. You should come immediately. The words blurred into white noise, clinical euphemisms for the thief that had claimed his father decades ago. Eleanor, his anchor, the woman who'd stitched his boyhood wounds with bedtime tales and unyielding faith reduced to monitors and morphine drips. He was on his feet before the line went dead, yanking on yesterday's slacks, the taste of bile rising like regret. The drive to the hospital was a fever dream, red lights blurring into streaks, the Holland Tunnel's fluorescent veins pulsing overhead. James gripped the wheel, white-knuckled fragments of memory assaulting him. Eleanor's hands veined and steady kneading dough for Sunday biscuits in their Brooklyn kitchen. Her laughter breathy but bright during FaceTime confessions about clinic patients who'd adopted her like a surrogate grandmother. He'd promised her the world, private jets to Mayo Clinic, consults a trust fund, plump as a holiday turkey. But presence, he'd rationed it like venture capital, doling out weekends between Tokyo trade shows and Tahoe team retreats. Now, as the Escalade screeched into the ER lot, rain slicked under sodium lamps, James felt the full weight of his ledger assets amassed, but accounts of the heart overdrawn. The ICU hallway stretched like a sterile purgatory linoleum, gleaming under harsh fluorescence, the air thick with antiseptic, and the muffled beeps of machines standing sentinel. Nurses glided past in a ballet of efficiency charts, clutched like grimoires, while families huddled in vinyl chairs, faces etched with the universal map of waiting. James paced the corridor outside Eleanor's room, his Brioni overcoat half-buttoned tie askew like a noose loosened in defeat. Dr. Patel emerged briefly, her scrubs crisp, her tone measured. She's responding to the diuretics, but it's touch and go. The heart's tired, Mr. Carter, years of giving without reserve. Talk to her. It helps. He nodded numbly, sinking into a molded plastic seat that creaked under his frame, elbows on knees, head bowed in a posture of prayer he hadn't assumed since childhood, Sundays in the pews of St. Augustine's. Helplessness clawed at him, a foreign beast, in the belly of a man who'd debugged global networks and outmaneuvered monopolies. He could summon cardiologists from Johns Hopkins with a single call wire, funds for experimental valves, or holistic retreats in Sedona. But here, in this fluorescent limbo, money was parchment powerless against the tide ebbing from his mother's veins. Tears pricked hot and unbidden, but he blinked them back. CEOs didn't crumble. They commanded. Yet the dam trembled, cracks, spiderwebbing from Luna's words, from Zoe's gap-toothed grin, from the envelope's quiet indictment. What good was his empire if it couldn't buy one more story from her lips? Footsteps approached, soft against the tile, and James lifted his head, expecting a chaplain or a well-meaning aide. Instead, Luna materialized at the hallway's bend, her silhouette framed by the vending machine's blue glow, a vision in a simple cable-knit sweater, the color of storm clouds. Jeans faded from playground skirmishes, her curls loosely braided against the chill. No coat, no purse. She'd come straight from wherever dawn found her, perhaps roused by a clinic volunteer's text chain or Eleanor's emergency contact list, where Luna's name sat, etched like family. Their eyes met across the divide, hers wide with the shared sorrow of souls who'd bartered with loss before. She didn't rush to him, didn't pepper with questions or platitudes. Instead, she offered a nod, small, steady, as if to say, "I've got this, watch with you." Wordless, she slipped past, pausing at the door to Eleanor's room where a nurse adjusted an IV line with practiced tenderness. Permission granted with a murmur, Luna entered the door, whispering shut behind her like a confessional veil. James rose, drawn inexorably, pressing his palm to the observation window's cool glass. Inside, under the halo of bedside lamps, Eleanor lay frail as a winter branch tubes, tracing her arms like invasive vines, her silver hair fanned on the pillow chest, rising in shallow cadence to the ventilator's rhythm. Luna pulled a chair close, the legs scraping softly, and took Eleanor's hand in hers, fingers intertwining with the reverence of old confidants. No dramatic gestures, no rehearsed eulogies, just presence, that elusive currency James had fumbled. Then, so faintly, the monitors nearly drowned it, Luna began to hum. The melody unfurled, slow and sweet, a lullaby James recognized from his own fractured boyhood. Hush, little baby. Eleanor's staple for stormy nights crooned over the phone during his college all-nighters. Luna's voice, low and honeyed with Atlanta inflections, wove through the room like smoke from a hearth. Hush, little baby, don't say a word. Mama's gonna buy you a mockingbird. Each note a thread mending the air's frayed edges. Eleanor's eyelids fluttered, not in pain, but in recognition. Her free hand twitched, seeking, and Luna clasped it gently, leaning close to whisper verses into the shell of her ear. The machine's symphony softened, as if in deference, and for the first time since the call, Eleanor's breathing eased, a fragile syncopation to the song's sway. James's vision blurred the window, fogging under his breath. The tears came then, not in polite streams, but in a torrent, hot tracks carving down his cheeks, splashing silent on the collar of his shirt. He didn't wipe them, didn't turn away. For the first time in years, since Dad's casket, since the boardroom eulogies that demanded dry eyes, he let them fall raw and unashamed. Vulnerability, that old specter, wrapped around him, not as weakness, but as release. A levee breached flooding fields, long fallow. Luna wasn't here merely for Eleanor, the woman who'd midwifed her rebirth in a clinic break room. She was here for him, the sun adrift in his own opulence, glimpsed in stolen moments, at playground gates and rain-lashed restaurants. Her song bridged them all, mother, son, stranger turned kin, in a harmony of quiet devotion. As the final verse faded, and if that diamond ring turns brass, Mama's gonna buy you a looking glass. Luna rose, smoothing the blanket with a mother's touch, and exited the room. The hallway reclaimed her footsteps, halting before him, her eyes tracing the salt-streaked map of his face, without flinching. She's fighting, Luna said simply, voice a balm. Like she taught us both to do. You should go in. Tell her about the garden, the one she planted in your heart, even if you forgot where the weeds grew. He nodded, throat too thick for words, and when she reached out, palm open steady, he took it, their fingers lacing in the corridor's indifferent light. In that clasp, the realizations cascaded. He'd been wrong so profoundly, to maintain the distance to armor his affections against the very messiness that made them meaningful. Luna hadn't stormed his walls. She'd illuminated the chinks, revealing not fortresses, but facades. And now, in the shadow of Eleanor's fragility, James felt the stirrings of true metamorphosis. Not for her sake alone, the woman whose gaze had schooled him in grace, but for his own, a reclamation of the boy who'd once chased fireflies in Brooklyn, lots unscarred by ledgers and losses. As Luna lingered, a silent sentinel at his side, James stepped into the room, the door sealing behind him with a soft click. He took Eleanor's other hand, the skin paper thin, and bent low, whispering promises not of portfolios or protocols, but of presence mornings, in the community plot, afternoons, with Zoe's Zoomer races evenings, where stories supplanted screens. The tears renewed, mingling with the lullaby's echo, and in their flow he glimpsed the man he might yet become, one who chose the hard path of showing up not out of obligation, but out of the deep, defiant love that Eleanor's life had etched into his bones. Outside, Luna waited her braid, a dark ribbon against the dawn, creeping through the blinds, a beacon beckoning him toward the choices that would at long last set him free. A week had slipped by in the hushed rhythm of hospital vigils and tentative recoveries, the kind of time that stretched like taffy, sticky, uneven, laced with the sweet ache of small mercies. Eleanor's color had returned in faint blushes, her room at Mount Sinai, blooming with potted mums from well-wishers and the faint aroma of chamomile tea Luna smuggled in during afternoon visits. James had rearranged his world around her board, calls routed to the cafeteria where he'd pace between vending machines and IV stands, trading algorithms for anecdotes about playground escapades. Luna became a fixture too, her shifts at PS 197, yielding to evenings of shared silences, folding laundry in the corner, quizzing Eleanor on crossword clues, her presence a quiet liturgy that mended what monitors couldn't. In those stolen hours, James felt the man he'd glimpsed in the ICU mirror take root, not the titan of Nexus, but a son, a suitor learning the liturgy of lingering. He'd shown up at the school twice that week unannounced, but unarmored jeans and a Henley, replacing the suit, his hands more at home tossing beanbags than signing NDAs. Zoe had claimed him as Uncle Awesome, in full, her walker clattering, as she bossed him through obstacle courses of hula hoops and hopscotch grids. Faster, Uncle, pretend you're chasing bad code. She'd command her laughter, a tonic that eased the knots in his shoulders. Luna watched from the sidelines, her smiles, no longer guarded, but gilded with the warmth of possibility. They'd shared coffee in the teacher's lounge conversations, meandering from Zoe's latest crayon masterpiece, a family portrait with stick-figure arms, entwined to the fragile architecture of trust. "It's not about perfection," Luna had said one afternoon, stirring sugar into her mug with deliberate swirls. "It's about showing up steady like the sun day in, day out, even when clouds roll in." James had nodded, the words nesting in the hollows his empire had left unfilled. By Friday, Eleanor was cleared for discharge, cautious steps with a walker of her own, a home health aide lined up, and strict edicts from Dr. Patel: rest, reflection, no heroics. James orchestrated it all with the precision of a product launch, a wheelchair-accessible SUV from the dealership, fresh linens aired on her Greenwich Village bed. As he wheeled her to the lobby, Eleanor's hand squeezed his, her voice a conspiratorial whisper. "That Luna's a keeper, Jamie. Like the women in those old Doris Day pictures, strong spines, soft hearts. Don't let the spreadsheets steal this one." He chuckled, masking the flutter in his chest, and promised he'd try. That evening, with Eleanor tucked in under quilts stitched from her mother's hands, James returned to his penthouse, the skyline a glittering apology for the weeks lost to shadows. Sleep came, easy dreams, threaded with Zoe's giggles and Luna's steady gaze. Saturday dawned with the brittle clarity of Indian summer sunlight slanting through Central Park's canopy in golden shafts that promised play, not peril. James's calendar held a high-stakes pivot, a virtual summit with Asian investors, the kind that could balloon Nexus's quantum division into a billion-dollar behemoth. He'd risen at 5 coffee black as ambition, his laptop synced to the conference room's massive screen. The team assembled remotely, suits from Singapore analysts, from Seoul projections flickering like fireflies on the wall. "Gentlemen," James began, voice honed to velvet steel, "this isn't just scalability, it's singularity. Our entanglement protocols will—" The interruption came at 9:23, his phone vibrating against the oak table like an earthquake in miniature. Unknown number, but the area code Harlem froze him mid-sentence. He muted the mic, answering with a clipped "Carter." Principal Alvarez's voice tumbled out, edged with the panic of 1,000 playground what-ifs. "Mr. Carter, it's from PS 197. Zoe Johnson, she's had an accident. Fell off the monkey bars during gym rotation. Legs bad, possible fracture, they're saying. Compound. Luna's in a training seminar across town. You're listed as emergency contact. Paramedics are en route to Harlem Hospital. Can you—" The line blurred into static as James was already moving chair, scraping back, laptop slamming shut with a finality that echoed through the empty room. "Meeting adjourned." He barked into the unmuted feed, ignoring the chorus of confused queries, timeline contingencies, and bolting for the door. The elevator descent felt eternal, each floor a tick of the clock he'd once worshipped. Investors could wait. Empires paused for emails. But Zoe. That fierce sprite with beads in her braids and dreams bigger than her braces, that was non-negotiable. He hailed a cab at the curb, barking, "Harlem Hospital lights and sirens if you have to." The driver's skeptical glance melting under the urgency in his eyes. The ride was a gauntlet of gridlock and ghosts, yellow cabs weaving like memories of Luna's stories, brownstones blurring past with the ghosts of his boyhood Brooklyn. James's mind raced ahead to the playground's unforgiving blacktop, to the snap of bone and the wail that followed, to the little girl who'd pierced his armor with a fist bump and a faith unearned. Why him as contact? A whim from Luna, after his playground visits perhaps, or Eleanor's quiet advocacy in a whispered phone call. It didn't matter. It mobilized him, this tether of trust flung across the chasm of his detachment. Harlem Hospital's ER buzzed with the controlled chaos of a Saturday surge, stretchers wheeling pagers, beeping the air thick with iodine and urgency. James burst through the ambulance bay doors, his Henley untucked loafers scuffed from the sprint across the lot. "Zoe Johnson," he demanded at triage voice cracking the air like thunder. A nurse, harried but kind-eyed, led him to a curtained bay where paramedics conferred in low tones, charts rustling like autumn leaves. There she was, Zoe, pale as porcelain. Under the fluorescent glare, her left leg elevated in a hasty splint, jeans sheared away to reveal a gash blooming red against her brown skin. The walker lay discarded like a fallen soldier, and her eyes, those luminous pools that had dubbed him Uncle Awesome, fluttered half open, glazed with shock and the sting of tears. "Uncle James." Her whisper was a thread fragile as spider silk, and it unraveled him. He dropped to his knees beside the gurney, enveloping her small hand in his, the warmth of her palm, a lifeline amid the chill. "Hey, Zoomer," he murmured, thumb tracing circles on her knuckles, the gesture instinctive as breathing. "I've got you, not going anywhere." The words poured out unscripted vows from a man who'd once measured commitments in clauses and caveats. "Remember that robot we sketched? The one that flies over monkey bars? We're building it first thing. You and me. No timeouts, promise." Zoe's grip tightened, a vice of tiny fingers, and she nodded, a single tear tracing the curve of her cheek. The doctors arrived in a swirl. X-rays, ordered morphine, administered consultations, murmured about surgery for the compound fracture pins to mend what play had marred. James stayed rooted, his free hand brushing sweat-damp curls from her forehead, recounting tales of his own scraped knees, the time he'd tumbled from a Brooklyn stoop chasing a stray cat, Eleanor patching him with mercurochrome and maternal magic. "Hurts like fire now," he confessed, voice low, "but it makes the stories better. Yours'll be epic, kiddo, the day Zoe the Zoomer conquered the bars." Blood seeped through the temporary dressing, staining his Henley in dark blooms that spread like ink on parchment, but he didn't notice, didn't care. Time folded in on itself, the ER's frenzy, fading to a hum until the curtain rustled once more. Luna, breathless and disheveled, her seminar blouse untucked, curls escaping their pins like wild vines. She'd raced from the uptown conference center, hailing buses and subways, in a blur of maternal dread, her phone clutched like a rosary. She froze in the threshold eyes, sweeping the scene, Zoe's pallor. The monitor's steady beep, and James, bloodied, bowed his broad frame, curled protectively around the child, like a shield forged from vulnerability. The dam broke then, silent and swift, Luna's hand flying to her mouth, as sobs racked her frame, tears carving rivers down her cheeks. She crossed the space in 3 strides, collapsing onto the stool opposite her free hand, joining theirs in a triad of trembling fingers. No words passed. None were needed. In James's gaze, red-rimmed, resolute, stripped of the CEO's polish, she saw the truth etched plain. The man who'd once navigated her world at arm's length now anchored it, sleeves rolled in the muck of midnight emergencies and unspoken oaths. He'd chosen chaos over conference calls, presence over projections, becoming not just the suitor she'd glimpsed in candlelight, but the partner who'd stand sentinel when the falls came. Zoe stirred between them, her voice a sleepy slur. "Family huddle, Miss Luna. Uncle Awesome stayed." Luna's laugh mingled with her tears, a watery chime that lightened the air, and she leaned across to press a kiss to Zoe's brow, then hesitant, electric, to James's temple, the salt of his skin mingling with hers. In that touch, understanding bloomed, unspoken barriers, breached not by grand declarations, but by the grit of showing up, sleeves stained and heart bared. James was no longer the cold architect of empires, tallying triumphs in isolation. He was the man who'd trade boardrooms for bedside vigils. His love a quiet revolution, fierce as a mother's, steady as dawn. As the anesthesiologist arrived, wheeling Zoe toward pre-op, with gentle assurances, James and Luna rose in tandem, their hands lingering in the space where Zoe's had been a bridge now between their worlds. The hallway reclaimed them, fluorescent and unforgiving, but in the wake of crisis, it felt hallowed, a turning point, where choices solidified into something sacred. James pulled Luna close, her head tucking under his chin, and whispered into her curls, "I'm here, for all of it." She nodded against him, the weight of years, losses layered like sedimentary stone, lifting just enough to breathe. In Zoe's small valor, they'd found their own, a family forged not in fanfare, but in the fierce, faithful act of staying. 1 year had woven itself into the fabric of their lives, like the golden threads of an heirloom quilt. Patchwork moments stitched from hospital recoveries, and Harlem sunrises from playground triumphs, and quiet kitchen confessions. The fracture in Zoe's leg had mended under the careful hands of surgeons, and the unyielding optimism of physical therapy her walker traded for a glitter-stenciled crutch that she wielded like a scepter of independence. At 10 now, she moved with a determined swagger, her braids swinging as she orchestrated kickball leagues on the very blacktop that had tested her. Luna had watched it all with the fierce pride of a mother who'd bartered stability for serendipity, her classroom at PS 197, blooming with new aids and adaptive tools, gifts from a foundation that bore no name, but carried James's quiet imprint. And James, the man who'd once measured mornings by market, opens now marked them by Luna's coffee ritual, dark roast, with a splash of almond milk, shared on the fire escape of her Harlem walk-up, overlooking streets, alive with the pulse of neighbors who'd become kin. Eleanor's discharge had been the first petal in spring's tentative bloom. Back in her Greenwich Village apartment, surrounded by bookshelves groaning under volumes of poetry and patient gratitude cards, she'd regained her color, rosy cheeks, from afternoon strolls in Washington Square Park, her laughter reclaiming its full-bodied ring during Sunday suppers, where James carved the roast and Zoe regaled them with tales of code-breaking math puzzles. The heart monitor stayed behind, a relic of fragility replaced by a regimen of yoga classes and clinic volunteer shifts that kept her hands busy and her spirit alight. "I've got stories left to tell Jamie," she'd say, winking over her bifocals, "and a front row seat to yours. Same dim." In those months, James had leaned into the uncharted delegating Nexus's empire to a trusted COO, carving space for weekly family labs, where he'd tinker with Zoe on Raspberry Pi projects, her small fingers guiding his through circuits that sparked more than solder sparks of connection, of a life rewired for wonder over wealth. Now, on a balmy September afternoon, 1 year to the day of Zoe's tumble, the once vacant lot on 125th Street stood transformed, a gleaming community center christened Harbor Lights. Its facade a mosaic of recycled glass tiles that caught the sun in prismatic dances. What had been weeds and whispers was now a beacon classrooms, humming with after-school coders, a rooftop garden bursting with heirloom tomatoes, and a courtyard where laughter echoed like wind chimes in a breeze. Funded by a blend of public grants and James's discreet philanthropy, it rose not as a monument to his name, but as a testament to Luna's mantra presence over provision routes, over riches. Today, it hosted the ribbon cutting for the Luna Johnson Education Equity Fund, a $10 million endowment for Harlem's public schools, seeding scholarships, sensory labs, and teacher sabbaticals inspired by the woman who'd taught him that true innovation began with a child's unblinking trust. The courtyard brimmed with faces old and new teachers, in sundresses clutching programs, parents with toddlers on hips, city councilors mingling with the kids who'd helped paint the entryway mural, a vibrant collage of superheroes and solar panels, Wakanda shields guarding equations. String lights draped the pergola like stars tugged earthward, and a jazz quartet from a local high school swung into "What a Wonderful World," the saxophone's mellow cry weaving through the crowd like an old friend's embrace. James stood at the podium, no longer in Bryony armor, but a linen shirt rolled to the elbows sleeves, bearing faint traces of last night's mural touch-up. His blue eyes swept the assembly, landing on Luna in the front row, her red sundress, a nod to their first meeting curls, loose and sun-kissed Zoe beside her, in a wheelchair for the occasion, though she'd ditched it hours ago for a victory lap around the block. "Ladies and gentlemen, neighbors, dreamers," James began, his voice steady but laced with the humility of a man remade. "A year ago, I stood on this very soil, then just cracked concrete and forgotten potential, and heard laughter that changed everything. Laughter from children who didn't know boardrooms from backyards, but who taught me the real code of connection. This center, this fund, isn't about algorithms or acquisitions. It's about equity, not the kind traded on screens, but the kind earned in shared lunches and second chances. And it starts with one woman, Luna Johnson, whose classroom isn't a room, but a revolution. She showed me that the greatest returns come not from ventures, but from vulnerability, from showing up with open hands and an open heart." Applause rippled like a gentle tide, cameras flashing from local reporters who'd traded skepticism for stories of second acts. Luna flushed, waving it off with a teacher's modest grin. But her eyes met his across the space, a silent colloquy of, "We did this." Then from the second row, a figure rose. Eleanor Elegant, in a pearl gray sheath, her cane, a mere accessory now, leaned upon lightly as she navigated the aisle. At 69, she moved with the grace of seasons, well-spent silver hair, in a chignon, a scarf of cornflower blue, fluttering like a banner of resilience. The crowd hushed as she reached the steps, James, descending to offer his arm, their shared glance, a wordless hymn of healing. "Luna, dear," Eleanor said into the microphone, her voice clear as church bells on a crisp Easter morn, drawing Luna forward with a beckoning hand. I've lived long enough to know that hearts don't mend with medicine alone, they heal in the company of souls who see you whole. You didn't just save my life that rainy night in the clinic. You called my boy home from the wilderness of his own making. He was a fortress when I met you, Luna, walls high drawbridge up. But you, with your songs and your sandwiches, your fierce love for that little firecracker Zoe, you slipped through the chinks and lit the rooms he'd locked away. Thank you, child, for reminding him and me that love isn't hoarded. It's harvested one brave bloom at a time. You've given us back our family, and for that this old heart of mine beats grateful. Tears glistened on Luna's lashes as she embraced Eleanor, the two women a tableau of generations entwined, mentor and mentee, mother and almost daughter. The quartet softened to a hush, and as the applause swelled anew, James caught Luna's elbow, guiding her to a secluded alcove beneath the pergola, where the string lights cast a constellation just for them. Zoe trailed her crutch, tapping a conspiratorial rhythm, but James knelt to her level, first, pressing a velvet box into her palm. Guard this for me, Zoomer. Your mission should you choose to accept it. She giggled, clutching it like contraband treasure, her eyes wide as saucers. Alone now, or as alone as one could be amid the murmur of celebration, James turned to Luna, the box open in his hand. No Tiffany blaze, no carat count cascade, just a simple gold band, unadorned, save for a delicate engraving inside Zoe's harbor. It caught the light, humbly a promise forged in fire escapes and fracture mends. Luna, he said, voice low, threaded with the gravel of truths long buried. I thought empires were built on bold moves, mergers at midnight, markets conquered. But you dismantled mine with a whisper. You didn't change my life with money, the kind that buys penthouses and pauses pain. You changed it by giving me a family, the messy, magnificent kind, with scraped knees and late-night fevers, with a little girl who calls me uncle, and a mother who calls me home. He slipped the ring onto her finger, the fit as sure as their shared breaths, and Luna's hand trembled in his, her brown eyes mirroring the stars above. James Carter, she whispered, tracing the engraving with her thumb. You were never lost, just waiting for the right map. And this, she lifted their joined hands, the band glinting like a vow etched in sunlight. This is our north. From the courtyard's edge, Zoe's voice pierced the veil, a triumphant whoop that silenced the quartet mid-note. We're a real family now, she hollered, arms flung wide, her crutch abandoned in the grass as she barreled toward them, the crowd parting like the Red Sea for her joy. Laughter erupted then, a cascade from the children who'd painted the walls, from teachers who'd traded shifts for second chances, from parents who'd seen their own stories reflected in the light. It swelled with the jazz resuming, Ain't No Mountain High Enough, and the string lights twinkled in approval, bathing the scene in a glow that felt eternal, a new dawn breaking over Harlem's steadfast heart. As the celebration swirled on cake, sliced under the pergola toasts raised to tomorrows, James, Luna, and Zoe stood at the center arms, entwined the ring, a quiet anchor amid the revelry. It wasn't an ending, this ribbon cut and ring-bound moment. It was inception, a beginning etched in the laughter of little ones and the wisdom of elders, where love proved the ultimate innovation, resilient, radiant, rooted deep. And to you, dear reader, those of us who've walked the long roads of raising rebels and mending what breaks, who've savored the quiet victories of a hand held through the storm, let this be your gentle summons tonight. As the sun dips low, reach for that phone, that pen, that unpaved path. Call the son who's wandered far, Write the letter to the friend whose laugh lingers like lavender, or simply sit with the ones under your roof and listen to the stories unfolding. Love, after all, isn't in the grand unveilings. It's in the daily dawns we choose to greet together. What small step will you take right now to light your own harbor? The world and your heart waits, ready to bloom.